Hello and thank you for joining us for the fourth episode of the new series, which is My Racing Life, the show where we take a look down memory lane with a racing personality. They pick out some of the races, some of the people which have rather shaped their life in the sport to date. And it's time to introduce the guest for today's show by this short enough but interesting biography. It's a man who is approaching a quarter of a century at the Racing Post, the current HWPA Writer of the Year, having previously won the award in 2011. This man has been an author of 3 books, including as ghostwriter for the autobiographies of Richard Hughes and Derek Thompson. And this is the most interesting one. A man who retired from the weighing room after finishing 4th in a Cheltenham charity race for Paul Nicholls, following which he was accused of stopping his mount on the course by an angry racegoer. Lee Mottershead, that last one can't be true, can it?
Sadly, it is. It was a great experience, Nick. I was able to ride out for lots of excellent trainers, and I got to this Cheltenham charity race, rode a horse for Paul called Goblet of Fire. And because of my inexperience combined with incompetence, I gave the horse too much to do. So it didn't look particularly good when we came in 4th place. And then as we came back down that great walkway at Cheltenham in front of the grandstands, where so many jockeys have had these feelings of euphoria, I had a racegoer come across to me on the stands, and he used a word which I won't repeat here because it's incredibly rude, but he accused me of stopping the horse. I think I'd gone off favourite, and then to make matters worse, he then ran round to the winner's enclosure and had a second pop at me thereafter. But it was definitely not corruption, it was incompetence.
Did that spoil the experience, or rather sort of add to it?
No, it just, you know, it added to it in some ways, because for me it all hammered home how difficult that job is. I mean, I thought coming down the hill I was on the heels of the leaders. As it turned out, I was 3 or 4 lengths behind. But it was a tremendous experience. The whole thing was great. We did it because a couple of jockeys suggested that if a Racing Post writer who couldn't ride learnt to ride and then competed in a charity race, it might make a decent series to follow. And it did, in the sense that there was quite a bit of hilarity on the way. I've got allergies, so I'd spend most of my time riding out for Ferdy Murphy, sneezing with eyes watering. But I got to ride out, say, for Paul Nicholls, Philip Hobbs, Willie Mullins let me ride out Florida Pearl in retirement at his place. So it was a tremendous privilege. I've not done it again since, but this year we did move to Ashstead, next door to Epsom. So there could be a few Epsom trainers dreading a phone call saying, could this very incompetent rider get back on a horse and go up the gallops?
Well, if they're listening, do get in touch. Now, the premise of the show is to pick out 7 races which obviously have shaped your life in racing. Some are before you started at the Racing Post, but a lot of them you would have written about in the 24 years that you've been at the Racing Post since. Was it difficult to pick out those 7, or did they all spring to mind quite quickly?
Most of them sprang to mind quite quickly. As you say, there's a combination of horses that have meant a lot to me professionally because I've written about their careers and followed them, but there are also horses that go back to my childhood and really got me hooked on the sport. But because I suppose as well I'm a bit of an old romantic, part of the problem is you become attached to horses and you really follow horses, and therefore you almost feel like you're doing them a disservice by not including them in the list. But I think we've got a nice balance across time, across the disciplines, and across those horses, I say, who meant a lot to me professionally. And going back to the very first one, who really just got me hooked on the sport.
And did you find it, even though you've picked out there are horses from the 80s, more recently than that as well, of course, did you find it stirring up emotion and certainly memories which sort of snowballed into other memories of what you were doing at the time?
Yeah, tremendous memories. And I think for most of us that are real huge fans of racing, the races and the horses become stopping points in our lives. So we remember things by what we were doing on a racecourse at that time or what we're watching at that time. And my other half often jokes with me that my entire calendar is built around race meetings. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and they do evoke other memories, and they're the constant joy that has gone through my life.
Can you put a time or a place on when the love of horse racing began?
Very young. Pretty much my earliest memories, I think, are linked to horse racing. I almost learnt to read, my parents told me, by reading the racing pages of newspapers. The great joy was always Saturday afternoons, watching Grandstand and World of Sport, then Channel 4 Racing on the TV, that sort of 2 or 3 hours when racing was on the telly. I remember as a school kid rushing home from school, and in those days we didn't have a video recorder at home, but my mum would record the TV racing onto an old tape recorder. So I'd get home at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I'd be listening to Graham Good or Peter O'Sullivan calling a race from the track that afternoon. And then again, as I got older, I was watching on a video, and then the Saturdays were a huge joy. And we lived in Lancashire, Blackburn, so my earliest racecourse memories are of days at Haydock, being stood next to that old privet water jump they had, watching the chasers soar over that fence, and loads of good winter Saturdays there. So yeah, pretty much racing has been with me throughout.
We will get the ball rolling, and the first of Lee's memories, we go chronologically, is the 1983 Grand National, won by Corbière.
Corbière in the lead from Grease Paint, your man, and Hello Dandy. Corbière by 3 lengths from Grease Paint, then comes your man, then Hello Dandy. They're racing towards the elbow in the National, and it's Corbière ridden by 23-year-old Ben de Haan, who's clear at the moment of Grease Paint in second, your man third, fourth is Hello Dandy, and it's Corbière with a furlong to run in the National, being pressed by Grease Paint. Corbière from Grease Paint putting in a tremendous run for Ireland, ridden by Mr. Colin Magnier. It's Grease Paint on the near side, beginning to get up as they race towards the line. It's Corbière from Grease Paint, and Corbière's won it. Corbière's the winner from Grease Paint, and a great salute from Ben de Haan. Third was your man, and 4 was Hello Dandy.
The immortal words of Sir Peter O'Sullivan, the first lady trainer to win the Grand National, Jenny Pittman, back in 1983, ridden by Ben de Haan. That was Corbière. Lee, you would have been 7 or 8 years old, and we spoke about this the other day when I just wanted to learn a little bit more about what we'd be talking about. Before we talk about the race, you told me a pretty lovely story with your father involving the Grand National, and probably how impressionable you were at that age. Just tell us a little bit more.
Still am quite impressionable, to be honest, Nick. Yeah, so my dad had this thing whereby on a Sunday then, before the National, the newspapers would publish the anticipated Grand National card. So you get the expected 40 on a field. And he would post it on a piece of card through the letterbox. And I, for years, had this belief that the Royal Mail sent the Grand National expected race card on a Sunday before the National to homes up and down the country. So I was very impressionable. Yeah, I don't believe that happens now, but at the time I definitely did.
A bit like believing in Father Christmas still at that point. But for you at that age, was the Grand National just about everything?
Yeah, and it still is, you know, by far and away, I think, my favourite race. It was the race that got me hooked. My favourite day of the year was Grand National Day. Grand National Grandstand was my favourite programme of the whole year. You know, you'd see David Coleman and then Des Lynam, you know, bringing in 4 or 5 hours of exciting sport, exciting horse race. There was nothing like the Grand National. The countdown to the race, then when the race took place, was just an amazing thrill. And I think that has stayed with me. The Grand National is still, for me, the one race above all others that I look forward to in the year. And Corbière, I think, was my first favourite horse, and he instilled in me, I suppose, this romantic love of horses that appear year after year and display tremendous courage, commitment, and that's what he did. I mean, he ran in 5 Grand Nationals. He won his first. He was third in 2 more. He somehow tipped up in his 4th National, but then in his final one, when he was past his best. But there's a wonderful story in Jenny Pittman's autobiography where she talks about going into the racecourse stables before the race and looking him in the eye, and she said there was a look he had that almost said to her, "Mum, I don't really want to do this anymore." And she watched that Grand National with great trepidation. Thankfully he came round in 12th place and finished his career off on high. But yeah, for years, Nick, I followed Corbière. Obviously, most of his races in those days, a lot of his races wouldn't have been visible because this was before racing channels. But he was a great horse to watch, tremendously courageous, and yeah, undoubtedly my first favourite horse.
And for all that you write about the horses, the exploits of horses in races now, a lot of the work that you will do involves the people and the human aspect of it. At that young age, how captivated by you, were you by some of the people in racing, the likes of Jenny Pittman? We'll come on, of course, to other characters in the 80s, of course, Sir Michael Stout now, but the era with Walter Swinburne as well. We'll talk about David Ellsworth. How struck by the people in racing were you at that young age?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think for me it was always first and foremost the horses. I think they were the stars of the sport, and they still are the stars of the sport, and we shouldn't forget that. They are ultimately what brings a lot of people into horse racing. But yeah, people like Jenny Pittman were such tremendous characters. You know, every Grand National Grandstand had this interview between Des and Jenny, and she became this huge name. And you know, one of the blessings of the job I've got now is if I talk to and write about people that as a child were boyhood heroes. And just recently I wrote a feature a profile on Jenny, and that does seem slightly surreal when you're writing about someone who you grew up watching. And you know, Jenny was just this amazing force in racing at the time. A lady who divided some people. She wasn't universally popular, I think, with people in her profession, but she definitely became a public figure, not just because of her character, but because of what she achieved. And
give us a flavour about, you were 7 or 8 when Corbière won the Grand National back in '83. Is it a passion that you had at that stage that you could share with school friends, or were you on your own with the love of racing?
It was definitely a minority, I'd say. I was in at school, but no, I did. I remember writing projects on horse racing. As I got older, there were a smaller group of people that shared the interest. But yeah, definitely for me, whereas most people, you know, followed Liverpool or Manchester United, or where I was Blackburn Rovers, I'd be following in the winter Jenny Pittman and Bender Harnoff and their horses on the flat, Michael Stout and Walter Swinburne. So yeah, I would be lying if I said it was a massive collective pursuit among my friends, but certainly at home, my mum and dad enjoyed watching racing. They certainly went from a horsey background. My dad was a factory worker, my mum was a stay-at-home housewife. But again, they loved that Saturday. We'd pick a horse out each. My dad would go off to the betting shop and place a treble on those 3 horses. We didn't often win, but it was certainly a thing on a Saturday. We came together and we watched the racing on TV. OK, selection 1 then was Corbière winning the 1983 Grand National. We moved to the end of the 1980s for Memory 2, one of the most iconic horses of them all, Desert Orchid in the Gold Cup.
Who jumps from Desert Orchid, but Desert Orchid is running. He's trying to come again towards the near side. It's Yahoo on the far side, Desert Orchid towards the near side. Desert Orchid's accelerating as they come to the last. Yahoo on the far side, Desert Orchid on the near side. It's Desert Orchid on the near side, Yahoo on the far side. Desert Orchid drifting over towards the stand side. He's beginning to get up. Desert Orchid is beginning to get up as they race towards the line. There's a tremendous cheer from the crowd as Desert Orchid is going to win it. Desert Orchid has won the Gold Cup. Yahoo is second. Third is Jara Barty. Simon Sherwood punches the air. Desi has done it. Desert Orchid's won it from Yahoo.
Oh, that magnificent day when it clicked together for Desert Orchid at Cheltenham winning the Gold Cup. But I just want to touch on what we heard there, Lee, because many people will have grown up with the tones of Sir Peter O'Sullivan. They would have shaped their interest in racing. We heard Corbière, of course, Sir Peter O'Sullivan, and then Desert Orchid. And you've been asked your most treasured piece of racing memorabilia, and you've said, I have a bronze statue of a horse with the jockey wearing Sir Peter O'Sullivan's silks, which you bought from the collection of items in Sir Peter's estate, which was sold on following his death. How important was Sir Peter O'Sullivan in your formative years?
Oh yeah, I mean, huge in the sense that my 2 racing idols back then, Nick, were Walter Swinburne and Peter O'Sullivan. He was just a soundtrack to so many amazing horse races, and we can all quote those O'Sullivan commentaries of Dawn Run's Gold Cup, Desert Orchid's Gold Cup, Red Rum's National. And so for me, he was the voice. And a bit like we'll talk about with Walter Swinburne later on, you know, when you get to meet your idols, you hope they're going to be the sort of people that you want them to be. And Sir Peter, he was. I mean, he was very old when I had the chance to meet him. And there were, we only had a few sort of meetings together. I interviewed him a couple of times.
Yeah.
I'm good friends with Bruff Scott and Sean McGee, who took me around to his flat once. We had a great chat there, and I remember seeing him in hospital towards the end of his life. And say after he died, there was this collection of his that was sold off for charity, and I bought a small little bronze horse with the jockey wearing his famous colours, those that we know from a TiVo MB friend in it, and it's downstairs on the mantelpiece, and it would be undoubtedly my most treasured racing possession.
How significant a day was that then, watching Desert Orchid win the Gold Cup in '89?
It was, and I'm pretty sure from memory that's when I managed to get back from school in time to watch the race. It's one of those races that everybody knows, everybody loves, and yet at the same time it is one that has that triumph and tragedy mixed in, because it's very hard to watch that race, and when they get to the third last fence, knowing what's going to happen to 10 plus, and it does show that amazing mix of triumph and tragedy that jump racing has. But then that home straight battle between Yahoo and Desert Orchid, and Desert Orchid doing what he did on so many occasions. And I'd say that anybody who was a fan of horse racing at that time took Desert Orchid to their hearts. He achieved, I would say, a level of fame as a racehorse that certainly hasn't been replicated since in this sport, and probably was only very rarely beforehand, maybe with Arkle and Red Rum. He had this flair, this charisma, this exuberance, this will to win, and it was helped by having tremendous people alongside him, including David Ellsworth. I think we'll speak about more when we do another horse further on into the list. But we all adored Desi. I remember just towards the end of his life interviewing Elsie, and by that point he moved to Newmarket and feeding Desert Orchid a polo mint. By that stage I think it was quite hard for Desi to get through a polo mint, but he did it. But yeah, just the most wonderful horse. I'm sure as this series goes on, there'll be a few names that crop up in many a list, and I'd be amazed if Desert Orchid doesn't feature widely.
Well, that's the thing with Desert. You picked the Gold Cup, but presumably if you'd have wanted to draw up a short list of the races which you enjoyed so much when he won, well, not even when he won, when he was beaten in some of them, the short list would be quite a long one, wouldn't it?
Oh, enormously long. I mean, I think Richard Hoyle's had that battle with Pegwar Bay in the Gainsborough Chase last week. There was the Irish National. There was that amazing first running of the Victor Chandler Chase when it looked like he was beaten by Panto Prince, but then came back, and again another great commentary by Peter O'Sullivan there. There was that Racing Post Chase when he carried 12 stone 3 pounds. He was the most amazing racehorse, and he dates back to a time when jumping was undoubtedly different. When we're talking about Jenny Pittman earlier on, well, she ran Borough Hill Lad off top weight in the Hennessy Gold Cup after he'd won the Gold Cup. Desert Orchid was a horse who was at the top of his game, but he ran regularly. He ran in the big handicaps. He carried top weight, and that's what I think fans want to see. They want to see these horses being given real tests and coming through them. And it almost doesn't matter if they win or lose, because I think horses like Desert Orchid, when on occasions he wasn't able to defy the weight, you didn't think any less of them. So he does go back to a different era for jump racing. The sport has changed. I'm not necessarily saying it's got worse, but often we don't see the stars to the extent we would have done then. And it would seem very odd now if a horse was given the sort of campaign that Desert Orchid was, that Borough Hill Lad was, and that's a shame.
What a mighty horse. Now, that was the 1989 Gold Cup. Later that year, in the summer, we saw the emergence of a real star on the flat. His name, Zilzal.
So they come down to the halfway stage in this Vange's Criterion Stakes, and it's Zilzal in the blue from Russian Bond and Shore Gold and Tay Wharf next to the rails are just being asked to quicken, and they've passed the 3 down to the 2, and it's Zilzal the leader with Russian Bond now. Shore Gold tries to quicken up as they pass the 2, Tay Wharf next to the rails, and Zilzal being asked to lengthen by Water Swinburn, and he's doing so. Long odds on, but Presta on the outside by Russian Bond. Shore Gold is finding his 7th furlong just a bit far, but could be coming up against an extraordinarily good horse in Zilzal, who really quickens clear most impressively, one horse race. It's number 3, Zilzal, the winner, Russian Bond second, with Tay Wharf in a photo, with Shaw Gold third and fourth, and so Zilzal justified.
Zilzal, whose name means earthquake in Arabic, who burned so brightly in the summer of 1989. That was the summer also of Nashwan, who you could have obviously picked if you were going to that year. Why Zilzal?
Yeah, it was an amazing summer. There was Old Vic as well. It was a sensational year for flat racing. I think I picked Zilzal for 2 reasons. One, he was a brilliant horse who captivated me at the time, but also I could have almost picked Nick any horse from a long list of those that were connected to Sir Michael Stout and Walter Swinburn. So kids had the Liverpool or Manchester or whatever. I had Stout, Swinburn. I would follow their horses religiously in the top races. Shergar was just a little bit before the time when I really remember watching racing. Corbière came 2 years later. But there was so many. I was one of the few people that was in the Shahrastani camp over Dancing Brave before and after the 1986 Derby. Ajdal, Shardy, Marwell. There was so many. Sonic Lady was one I was mad keen on as well. But Zilzal had that element of brilliance, and in some ways he's the direct opposite of the Corbières and the Desert Orchids. He only raced 6 times. Started his career in a conditions race at Leicester, which he won by a huge margin. Then he won the Jersey Stakes in imperious fashion. That race that we just saw there, the Criterion Stakes, came shortly after that, and was really just to give him more experience before he dipped his toes into Group 1 waters. And then he did that in the Sussex Stakes, in which he was fantastic, and then again in the QE2 at Ascot, where in a small field, under a brilliant front-running ride by Walter, he made all to beat Polish precedent, who'd come into the contest as the star French miler. He'd won the Moulin, the Jacques Le Marois. He had a huge reputation, but Zilzal just dismissed him totally. He was much the best horse on the day. He was a temperamental animal too. He'd go to the start, buckets of sweat pouring off him. He was very much on his toes. I think ultimately that's what did for him when he went to America for the Breeders' Cup Mile. And he didn't win the race that we all wanted him to win, because at that point there'd been no British winner of a Breeders' Cup Mile, and Zilzal was a red-hot favourite to do it, and in the end he didn't do it. He boiled over. There was trouble with the outriders down the start. He missed the kick and it just didn't happen for him. But I think in his pomp in the QE2 and the Sussex Stakes, he was outstanding. Not a horse I think that many people have attached themselves as one of their favourites, but he did it for me. He had that brilliance about him that really did attract me.
We're kind of going through a journey of your life so far in racing. Corbière, you were, 7 or 8 years old. By the end of the 80s, 14 or 15. By this point, did you know a career in racing media was all you wanted to do? Where were you?
Well, where was I? I was still in Lancashire. I was probably at that place, so I was 14, 15, so I'd be doing GCSEs onto A-levels. And I guess I think I knew, Nick, I wanted to work in horse racing, but I didn't know what I wanted to do in horse racing. As I say, I'd grown up in a Lancashire town, no experience whatsoever of horse racing or rural activities. Even when I went to university, I went to university in York. One of the main reasons being it was York, and there was the Knavesmire, and Wetherby was a short bus ride away, Doncaster wasn't far, Pontefract, Beverley, etc., etc. But even coming out of York, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that horse racing was by a country mile my passion, and I wanted to work in horse racing, but doing what, I wasn't sure. And I remember writing tons of letters to different people in horse racing, seeking some sort of employment or seeking some sort of guidance. I applied for the BHB grad scheme, which I didn't get on. And I pretty much abandoned hope to the extent that I remember applying for a job of an estate agent in Preston after graduating. Now, I didn't get that, which was a good thing for me and for estate agency, because I wouldn't have been a very good estate agent at all. And just pretty much as I'd abandoned hope of getting a job in horse racing, I saw in the Racing Post an advertisement for a classified sales manager, which with excessive chutzpah I went for. Not surprised I didn't get it, but there was an internal appointment, and the junior job in the ads department was therefore available. And a fantastic lady called Sarah Sands, who's still with the Racing Post, very kindly gave me the job. And within about a week, I'd moved from Lancashire to Surrey, where the Racing Post offices in those days were not far from Wimbledon.
We are going to bridge the gap now. From 1989, we go to the early part of this century, to the early part of the millennium, and a horse which means so much to Lee. We'll find out more. It was Persian Punch.
It's Persian Punch by a length to Castari. Millenary is just cantering, pootling along over on the far side, but will he get the trip? Savannah Bay, Castari hangs left, Persian Punch in the centre, Millenary challenging on the far side. Then in behind them, Foljana's still got a chance, followed by Savannah Bay and Porter Sixtum. They run down into the dip. Millenary is taking it up now. Foljana looks the danger. Persian Punch battling on, and Castari out wide, almost four in a line. All four under maximum pressure, and Persian Punch is rallying very gamely on the near side of Millenary. Foljana between them. Persian Punch, he's got his nose in front for Millenary. It's going to be tight. Oh, that's close. Millenary and Persian Punch as one passing the line. That is really too close to call. The judge is going to have to call for his...
The magnificent Persian Punch, called home by Simon Holt, who will have a guest on this show in a week or so's time. That was 2003. Now, you, of course, Lee, many people will know, the writer of Persian Punch, the authorised tribute. How did that come about?
Look, really, like a lot of things, I think, in my career, I had ended up writing a few of Persian Punch's race reports, and I'd written a long feature on him for the Racing Post. And at that point, we were trying to publish more racing books. It's not an easy market, racing books, because they've got a limited audience, but we're doing more and more. And I think it was at the start of his 2002 campaign, we had this idea of writing a tribute book to Persian Punch. We had the support of David Ellsworth, the trainer, and Jeff Smith, the owner. So I basically told his story, wrote the story during that year, and what a story it was, because I think he was at that point undoubtedly the most popular flat horse there'd been for a long time, partly because he wasn't like a flat horse in the sense that he'd been around for ages, he kept racing, he had a lot of the qualities of Desert Orchid in that he was a supreme battler, amazingly courageous, never knew when to give in. And so through that year I wrote his story. His final full season ended with that amazing victory that we just saw there at Newmarket, when he looked beaten and then fought back to win the Jockey Club Cup. Fast forward then to the following April, and the book was pretty much written. In fact, the manuscript was as good as done. There were 90,000 words in the bank, but he was making his seasonal reappearance in the Sagaro Stakes. Yeah. And I remember going there just with this idea that if he won that race, we could have it as a nice little postscript to the book, or if he ran badly and they retired him, again, that could be the postscript to the book. But obviously that didn't happen. And on a really grim day, when I know other people have said that something didn't feel quite right throughout that day, in the Sagaro Stakes, as Martin Dwyer related very eloquently on this programme. Yeah. The old lad just went, his legs buckled up the home straight after Martin had pulled him up, and he went down. And I remember running down the track there where Elsie was, and Dick Brown, the horse's adoring groom, and it was obvious that he'd gone. And I remember after Elsie walking away, hugging people who were there. You know, it was a private grief shared, and in some ways it summed up what Persian Punch was, because he was very much a public horse. It felt like he belonged to all of us. He had this huge group of fans. And I remember that day at Ascot, although I wasn't actually meant to be writing for the Racing Post, I wrote a few words about the horse and the scene there. And I remember we used the phrase, he ran his heart out, which is literally what he did that day. He was the most amazing horse, and I think David Ellsworth is the most amazing trainer. At the end of this programme, I'll be talking about a trainer I've picked out as my desert island disc trainer, if you like, and it is an Elsie, but it could have been Elsie, because not only was he the supreme dual-purpose trainer of his time, a man who achieved things that very few had, because he was at the same time he was saddling top-class winners over the flat and jumps, but he is just the most fascinating man. He's one of those people that when you interview, you know you're going to get good copy out of him. I don't know if I was drawn to him partly because facially he's quite like my late father. There's a lot of him in Elsie, and also in character too. And I remember the most emotional interview or experience I've had in an interview was with Elsie in that Chinese restaurant in Newmarket that many viewers will have been to in the past. We were talking about his incredible career, and I asked him why he'd stopped training jumpers, and he told this story of a horse who'd run at Lingfield, who had fallen up the home straight, and Elsie, again a bit like that day at Ascot, had gone down the track to see this horse who was on the ground, and Elsie told this story of how the horse had looked at him, and Elsie said it was almost like they were saying, "Okay, Dad, what do I do now?" And sadly, there wasn't going to be any hope for that horse. And as he said those words, "What do I do now?" he got emotional and he had to leave the room. And I thought that was a story that he's clearly told quite a few times. But even in the umpteenth telling of it, it still made him emotional. And that's why he pulled away from jump racing, because it was just becoming too much for him. But again, I think he is the most amazing figure. Celebrated his 80th birthday last year, and long may he reign.
Absolutely right. Really fascinating to hear that story. But on reflection with Persian Punch, going back to him, the winner of 20 of his 63 races, to use the cliche, he wore his heart on his sleeve. Is he very much... Was he one of the easiest horses to put on the list, given the fact that the connection of writing the authorised biography of him, and the fact that we saw him for so long? There was the brilliance and the triumph on one side, but almost the story was there with the tragedy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was a horse who, as a horse, I adored. And professionally, he meant an awful lot to me. As I say, as a writer, to write your first book is a big deal. His was a great story to tell. You know, ultimately, doing what I do and what we do in this profession, we are storytellers. And when you have a story that, as you say, Nick, has those elements of triumph and tragedy, and when you have a horse who has such amazing people surrounding him, then telling the story is a real joy. So yeah, absolutely. For me, on many levels, Persian Punch was and remains an important part of my life.
Persian Punch then. We move on to the next selection of Lee's as he takes his look down memory lane. And there he is, that magnificent grey Rooster Booster in the 2003 Champion Hurdle.
Approaching the final flight, he says go on Rooster Booster, who's jet propelled at the last. Rooster Booster 6 or 8 lengths clear and pulling further away from West Ender into Sky Falcon, Rhinestone Cowboy, self-defence from the rear, but Rooster Booster is storming up the Cheltenham Hill here in the hands of Richard Johnson, and Rooster Booster wins the Champion Hurdle. In second is West Ender, Rhinestone Cowboy stayed on for third, just ahead of self-defence, a massive run. In fifth, the long-time leader into Sky Falcon. In contrast, landing line...
What a star he was, 2003, the Champion Hurdle. 11 lengths the win of Rooster Booster. Now, obviously, in this period of prolonged downtime, we're taking looks back down memory lane. So, too, are the Racing Post. And this article I saw resurface online recently, one that you'd written a few years ago. And I liked this quote. You said of Rooster Booster, his was a rags to riches story befitting of Eliza Doolittle. What inspired you to use that precise line, Lee?
I could be I'm a big fan of musical theatre as well, Nick. So it was just melding, bringing the two together there. Yeah, I became slightly obsessed about Rooster Booster, and he did have this rags to riches story. You know, he was initially owned and trained by the Mitchell family, who then sold him on to Terry Warner after he won a race at Taunton. But then what was amazing was that from that it was a maiden hurdle at Taunton, to winning the 2002 County Hurdle, he went 16 races without a win. So that when he went to that County Hurdle and won that day, he'd only won one race in his life. But although it was a story of 16 consecutive defeats, they were often hugely valiant defeats. In that period, he was second in two what was then Tote Gold trophies, now the Betford Hurdle. He was placed in a Pierce Hurdle at Leopardstown, an Imperial Cup. He was always there and thereabouts, and there was never any sense that this was a horse that was throwing victory away. He was what the British seems to love more than anything else. He was a marvellous loser, someone who you sympathise for. You thought, oh my goodness, when is he finally going to get his day? And then when he did get his day in that County Hurdle, it was wonderful. But even at that point, I don't think any of us who were Rooster Booster fans thought that in the following season he was going to do what he did, which was extraordinary. From a small conditions hurdle at Kempton on that what used to be Charisma Gold Cup day, that used to be called the Captain Quist Hurdle. He won that on the bridle to Norman Williamson, and then went to the Greatwood Hurdle and to the Bula Hurdle that was, and then a race at Sandown, until he reached this point at Cheltenham when he was taking on a horse who again was the direct opposite, Rhinestone Cowboy, a novice with very little experience, up against Rooster Booster, who'd been around forever, it seemed. And what he did that day, which we just saw, was extraordinary. I can't imagine there have been many horses who've come off that downhill section on the old course at Cheltenham travelling as well as he did. You know, you had Dickie Johnson there, his arms being pulled out as he went around the bend, just waiting to release Rooster Booster. And then when he did, when he sent him on, it was like a taut elastic band was going ping, and whoosh, off he went. He flew that final flight, galloped up the hill to line, and it was like justice was being done, and this grafter who'd given so much to the sport was having his day in the sun, and not just that, he was winning the Champion Hurdle with an ease and by a margin that we just hadn't really seen like that before. He was an amazing racehorse. And then of course you had the irony that what followed his Champion Hurdle victory was a remainder of a career. It was almost like what had come before that amazing 2002-03 season, when he ran in lots of big races, and again he often just came up short. There was a Tote Sport Trophy at Newbury when he was trying to carry top weight as the Champion Hurdle winner, giving lumps of weight to all his rivals, looked sure to win, and then was caught on the line by Geos. So the two ends of Rooster Booster's career were this story again of heroic defeat, which I say is what the Brits love. But then there was that season when he was unbeatable, when he was magnificent, and when he was an absolute joy to watch.
He was. How much we've got the variety here. We've got Grand National horses, we've got milers, stayers on the flat. We've moved to the 2 mile hurdlers. How much do those championship 2 mile hurdlers quicken the pulse for you?
Yeah, they do. They do. They absolutely do. We had Isterbrack not long after, and they do bring a particular thrill, because a bit like 2 mile chasing, there's so little margin for error. But I suppose one thing that runs through my love of racing is I pretty much enjoy all of it. I've always had a bit of a sprint handicaps with my nemesis. I can't ever quite get those right, but I love all horse racing. You know, once I'm embedded in the jump season, I can't imagine watching anything else. And then you get to Craven meeting time, and you want to get involved in the flat season. So yeah, I love it all, Nick. And yeah, 2 mile hurdlers certainly among them.
13 years after Rooster Booster, Cheltenham saw one of its greatest ever comeback stories, Sprinter SACRE.
Sprinter SACRE has sprung into the lead. A slight stumble on the final turn. Here's the second from home. Sprinter SACRE clears away by 3. Undersow on the inside, followed by Special Tiara and God's Own. Sprinter SACRE is over the final fence and clear. Undersow is in second. Back in third, Special Tiara, followed then by God's Own. But it is Sprinter SACRE. They say they never come back. This is one of the great comebacks in the history of the Cheltenham Festival as Sprinter SACRE is the champion again. Sprinter SACRE wins, tight for second between Undersow and Special Tiara.
4 years on from that, and it just never, ever gets old watching that. Sprinter SACRE's remarkable comeback to win a second Queen Mother Champion Chase, Lee. Your role to put words effectively to what we would have seen. When something like that happens and you're privileged enough to be there, how excited do you get to be able to put your thoughts down onto copy and see it the next day in the paper? How exciting is it to just be able to write about what you've just seen?
It's enormously exciting. It really is. I mean, it's one of those where you rush down to the winner's enclosure, and then for some race like that you might get a post-race press conference and you're taking it all down and you're just desperate to relate that story. A little bit, Nick, like when you do an interview with someone as a journalist where you might spend an hour, 90 minutes talking to them, and you know you've got amazing material on the dictaphone, and the first thing you want to do is to transcribe those words and put those words into a story. And Sprinter SACRE's story, I mean, what he did that day, he couldn't do. He shouldn't have done it. 3 years earlier, he had been just about the most breathtaking and talented steeplechaser I think we've seen since Arkle. There'll be lots of debate about, you know, was Corto Star better than Sprinter SACRE? And to it doesn't really matter. But I think in that season, and in his season before, in his novice chase season, when he won that Game Spirit on the bridle, the Arkle on the bridle, and then the following season, the Champion Chase on the bridle, he was the unbeatable racehorse. There was nothing around that could beat Sprinter SACRE or would have a hope to beat Sprinter SACRE. And then it all came tumbling down. There was that day at Kempton when he was pulled up and the heart scare, the heart problem was diagnosed. He did come back, but in the 2015 Champion Chase, he was pulled up by Barry Geraghty. He was cantered back down the racecourse, and I think everybody there that day, or the vast majority of people there that day, would both have expected his retirement to be announced and probably wanted his retirement to be announced, because the story had become quite sorry. We couldn't have foreseen what was to happen the following season. It was by far and away Nicky Henderson's crowning glory as a trainer, and all associated with that yard. To get that horse back, that beautiful horse, because I remember writing a few times, he was like a racehorse with matinee idol looks. He was the most gorgeous individual. And to bring him back, that first victory at Cheltenham that season in the Schlur Chase was incredible. It got you cheering from a long way out, because in some ways you thought this was the crowning moment, this was the comeback. I still don't think we thought we would get what we got on Champion Chase Day. Well, remember, Undersow was the odds-on favourite. He was the one who was expected to win. Sprinter SACRE was not the favourite going into that race. We had the amazing point going down the hill when Sprinter SACRE and Undersow came together, and Sprinter SACRE galloped away from him down the hill. And I remember writing something along the lines of, you could almost see Undersow having a look of disbelief on his face as this old warrior galloped away from him, rolling back the years. And in that season, that 2015-16 season, he clearly wasn't as good as he was 3 seasons earlier. He was in fact a long way inferior to what he'd been at his best, but it was almost better, because again, we all love a story as storytellers and as consumers of stories, of individuals, of athletes who've had it, lost it, and then got it back again. And that resurrection of Sprinter SACRE was one of the most awe-inspiring experiences I've known in racing.
I agree, but for you as a journalist, who we spend a lot of your time writing political issues in racing, talking about television contracts and so on, whatever the burning issue is a race like that something that brings you back to why you love the sport in the first place?
Yeah, completely right. You know, I'm very lucky with the Racing Post. I think I've got as good a job as there is there, in the sense I get to do a bit of everything. I'm a feature writer, I'm a columnist, I do news stories, you say I do politics stories, I wrote, I've written the last 15 times the last year about ITV getting a new contract but never getting a new contract. So I do lots of different things, but ultimately I'm hooked on what happens on the turf. That's what gets you into horse racing, not right about who's the next BHA chief executive. It's about who wins the races. And as I said at the start of the programme, for me always, it's always been primarily about the horses. They have always been the stars for me. And when you have a horse like that, who has such an amazing story, an amazing backstory, and in the moment when there's such intense pressure, euphoria, excitement, that's what it's all about. And a day like that, and with another horse we're going to talk about later on, when you have an experience on a racecourse where pretty much everybody there ultimately is cheering for the same thing and wants the same thing, that's so uplifting. And I think Sprinter SACRE on that day at Cheltenham was one of those moments.
Well, it's a job that's taken you to Cheltenham on many an occasion, but it's also taken you across the world, down under, to see one of the real stars of Australia.
She comes and the valley roars. Weeks on the outside moves up, takes the lead from Ben Battle, then Rostropovich and D'Argento into the straight at the 200 metres. It's Weeks in front by a leg. Ben Battle's going with her. Weeks 3/4 Ben Battle. Weeks is staving off Ben Battle. Cometh the hour, cometh the legend. Greatness, Weeks has done it. It's Equine Utopia. 2 legs to Ben Battle, Humidor, then a gap to Avilius. Behind those horses, then Rostropovich, D'Argento, Savvy Cope and Kingsville Dream has been pulled up in the back straight.
The mighty Winks, her 4th and final win in the Cox Plate. Remarkably, Lee, the journey ended a year ago to this very month. It doesn't seem a year since April 2019 when Winks was retired. But what was it about Winks and the whole experience of her racing career that made you want to go out there and follow her?
She was just this incredible winning machine who had a sense of theatre about her. I think when you see a horse whose performances are as thrilling as Winks' often were, it's very difficult not to be attracted to them. There were countless occasions in her career when at the top of a home straight you thought this horse cannot win. There was an Epsom handicap she ran in when she was miles behind. One of her first wins in the winning streak, the Sunshine Coast Guineas. I think there were some 18 horses in front of her, a furlong and a half out, and yet she still came through to win. She was an incredible racehorse. Having her on this list will annoy a lot of people because for some reason over here there are a lot of people who really didn't like Winks and will resent her being anybody's list of favourite horses. But for me, she was fabulous. I remember going out as a paying spectator to her final Cox Plate, her 4th Cox Plate, her 3rd and 4th Cox Plates, because I'd become captivated by her story and the people around her. Chris Waller, as a trainer, is a remarkable individual, and watching on Saturday mornings on TV a race from afar, you never see a Winks post-race interview in which Chris wouldn't break down in tears because she'd come to mean so much to him. So towards the end of her career, when this amazing winning streak was building, I just wanted to feel some way part of it. So I say I went out to Australia to Moonee Valley twice to see her final 2 Cox Plates, and then very fortunately I was in Sydney, as you say, this time last year pretty much for a final race when she won the Queen Elizabeth Stakes at Randwick. And the great thing about Australian racing, and again, not everybody here really warms to Australian racing, but the great thing about it is that horses can become huge stars over there, and they've had it a lot in recent years. They had Mackay Bediva, a 3-time Melbourne Cup winner. They had obviously Black Caviar, and then Winks as well. And to be in Melbourne for a final Scotch Plate and to be in Sydney for a final race, as a racing fan, it made you more of a racing fan because there was such a sense of excitement, of togetherness around it. Everybody knew who she was. I remember after her her final Cox Plate, for example, the Herald Sun, which is one of the big mass-selling newspapers over there, the day after they devoted 33 pages to a Cox Plate success. Now, can you imagine a newspaper over here, a normal newspaper, devoting 33 pages to Frankel's final victory at Ascot? It just wouldn't happen. But over there, Winks had become this massive star. She went into a final race going after a 25th Group 1 victory, a 33rd consecutive success. There was enormous pressure on all connections, but again, it was like that day at Cheltenham when everybody there wanted her to win, and she delivered again with a sense of theatre. And for me, as a racing fan, to see a horse who'd won that many races, who kept turning up, who kept winning races in the style that she did, for me, she was intoxicating.
It sounds
for
like,
all the right reasons.
Well, from what you've just said there, it sounds like for someone in your role, racing journalist utopia going out there. But in your view, you've said twice or three times now about how she might not be that popular over here. The debate raged at the time, did she need to travel? And in your view, did she?
No, she didn't. No, she absolutely. I mean, it would have been great if she'd come across to Royal Ascot, and I suspect that seeing what happened to Black Caviar influenced connections. But I think as racing fans, we live in a bubble, and I think as British racing fans, we can live in a British bubble, or as Irish fans in an Irish bubble. And we take this view that an international horse has to come over here to prove him or herself. The reality is that in Australia, the Cox Plate is their Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. When Winks was going towards her fourth Cox Plate, she was seeking to make horse racing history there. No horse had won 4 Cox Plates. What was happening then was akin to what was happening in Europe last year when Enable was trying to win the third arc. And for me, to have asked the owners of Winks or Chris Waller to bring Winks to Royal Ascot for 5 months before she was trying to make turf history over there would have been the same as expecting John Gosden and Prince Khalid Abdullah to run Enable in Sydney or Melbourne 4 or 5 months before her final, or Tilsit winning a third arc. It was never realistically going to happen. And in terms of Winks' legend in Australia, winning a 4th Cox Plate was always going to be bigger than winning a race at Royal Ascot. And she was an Australian racehorse. And connections, I don't think, can be accused of being cowards. They raced her until she was, well, they raced her into the autumn of her 7-year-old Southern Hemisphere season. You know, she won 33 consecutive races. She raced more often than Corto Star. You know, she was a racehorse who was campaigned as a racehorse. She competed regularly. She travelled back and forth from Sydney to Melbourne. She was an amazing grafter. And for me, regardless of the fact that she never raced in Europe, that for me doesn't impact on what she did at all. She was an incredible racehorse.
She was. The figures are staggering. Your love for Australian racing comes through as well as we pick out a legendary jockey and a legendary trainer, and we will start with the latter. And it is, of course, Gay Waterhouse. You've already said, when asked our questions in advance, about your love of Australian racing, but another article has resurfaced recently, and it's about Gay Waterhouse and your time with her in 2013. A lady who's been a trainer nominated as an Australian living legend, in 2018 inducted into the Sport of Australia Hall of Fame. But your 2013 interview, she said she met you, or you said you met her one morning very early over there, around about 4:30, and she said, "We'll do what I call a walk and talk." What was that like?
Well, for a start, she can do an awful lot of talking in Gay Waterhouse. There is nobody like Gay Waterhouse, really. She has this amazing story, and she has a huge sense of celebrity in Australia. There are no racehorse trainers in this part of the world, indeed outside of Australia, who I think have the level of fame, national fame, that they do in Australia. That they are big public figures. Now, Gay was the daughter of an enormously famous trainer, T.J. Smith. But since she became a trainer in the 1990s, she has become a huge Australian figure. I remember on one trip to Australia, driving away from the airport, and the first advert you saw was for Gay Waterhouse Racing Syndicates. She's famous because she's got an enormous joie de vivre. She's got an enormous character. She has infectious enthusiasm. She's always keen to talk about horse racing, and she does so in a slightly madcap way at times. She's a unique character, but she's also an achiever. She's someone who had to fight against the odds to get her training licence. Her dad didn't want her to have a training licence because she was taking on the establishment, in the sense that she's married to Robbie Waterhouse, who is a bookmaker from a family that's had a bit of scandal attached to it. So they had to change the law in Australia in many ways for Gay to get a training licence, because they changed the law whereby you couldn't be prevented from having a licence because of what your spouse had achieved. And Gay, as an individual, that morning at Flemington, you know, Nick, we met at 4:45. She'd been up since 2:30. She gets up early in the morning to make bags of dried fruit and nuts for the staff riding the horses in the morning. She calls it her bags of loaves and fishes, which she hands around. She wins Group 1 races aplenty, 4 in the recent Sydney Carnival. She's a massive force of nature, and I think if you spend time with Gay, you'll leave on a high. And just coincidentally, that year when I did the interview with her, it was mainly about her career, and in her life, she as an actress, she appeared on Doctor Who. Yeah. With Tom Baker. So she'd done it all, but she was building up to trying to win the Melbourne Cup for the first time, which she did that year with Fiorente, and she's won plenty since then.
And it's time for the legendary jockey. Walter Swinburn is who you've gone for, the choir boy who we so sadly lost back in December of 2016. Of course, a link to the brilliant Shergar 1981. Why Walter Swinburn?
As a kid growing up, I was the most colossal fan of Walter. Again, I kept scrapbooks of all those stout Swinburn horses that he rode. I thought he was the most beautiful jockey. Watching Walter on a 2-year-old first time out was a fabulous thing to see. He gave them such incredible educational rides. He was at one with a racehorse. They were like one entity when they were racing. And again, a bit like some of the horses that I've spoken about in this programme, Nick, he had this story of incredible ups and downs. There was that fall in Hong Kong that almost took his life. There was his eating issues. He had problems with alcohol, but he had this most amazing talent. And in some ways, I think professionally, he connects the start of my passion for racing to the job I do, because I was one of 2 journalists in Westminster Coroner's Court for the inquest that determined that Walter had died of a tragic accident. And it was almost for me as a racing fan coming full circle, because Walter, who I'd followed throughout my racing life, who I'd been able to speak to in retirement, when I found him to be a wonderfully kind and gentle and slightly fragile man in many ways, but meeting him like meeting Sir Peter O'Sullivan, it was a case of meeting your idol and finding him to be the person that you wanted him to be. Then finding myself in Westminster Coroner's Court and writing about his death was horribly tragic, and it was horribly sad. Yeah. But in that Coroner's Court, hearing the coroner talk about all these amazing horses that Walter had ridden and all he'd achieved, it only served to remind me what an incredible talent he was. And very like, I think, all the great jockeys that Sir Michael Stoute has been associated with, Kieran Fallon and Ryan Moore, he will still most be associated with Walter Swinburn, and that says a lot for what they achieved together, but also for an outstanding talent as a horseman and jockey Walter Swinburn was.
Lee, thank you. Lovely words. We're on to the final few seconds, or into the final few seconds of the show. How much have you enjoyed looking back?
Yeah, it's been fantastic, Nick. I am a romantic at heart, and having a chance to look back through all those horses, through all those racing moments, it's been fabulous. And anybody who gets the pleasure and privilege of doing the same on this programme is in for a treat.
Lee, thank you very much. A really enjoyable hour. I hope you enjoyed Lee's thoughts and his look back down memory lane in the latest instalment of My Racing Life. We'll see you again very soon.